Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's Inspiring Leadership Podcast. As I was a young officer back in 1991, I remember the vivid pictures of my guest, John Peters, and his colleague being captured as prisoners of war during the Gulf War. Stayed with me vividly until this day. And so it's actually very special to have John on the podcast. John's got a wealth of experience from his days when he was a prisoner of war for those 7 weeks where he was captured and he was tortured. And he's now a very successful speaker, management consultant, and leadership developer. So it's nice to have someone who's got that combination of experience as a leader, hasn't just read the books, but he does read a lot of books. And now he's back to share his wisdom, his cynicism, his insight into what makes things tick and what doesn't make things tick. Without further ado, John, welcome to the Inspiring Leadership Podcast.
Good to be here. Thanks, Jonathan.
Well, it's lovely. And we have a mutual friend in Adam Fox-Edwards, who's going to be coming and riding with us on the Ride to Inspire, a charity event we're doing the 10th to 12th of July. So if you're free, we'd love you to come and join a big gang of us riding for charity.
Anyway, men in lycra, frightening.
Middle-aged men in lycra, and women of all ages in lycra as well. It's not just the middle-aged men, luckily. But apparently, I was looking up that 9 out of 10 women fear cycling on some of the back roads, or many of the roads, or in cities. It's a thing. This is why you see so many middle-aged men. We're just reckless, and we probably, like children, the prefrontal cortex is completely gone. We have no fear once again. But talking about fear and learning from it and things like that, I remember being with Field Marshal Inge, who was head of the army at the time, just after you'd been captured. And we went to Hereford to see the SAS for a briefing from the Sergeant Major that you knew, Billy, who got caught in the Gulf War, and he was tortured and interrogated. He was sharing his experience. You can't get away with just name, rank, number, date of birth. Things changed after that because you have to have a story. But I just wondered how your experience as a prisoner of war has shaped your perspective on leadership and resilience.
Rather large question. I think it shaped my life, and actually to the betterment of it. You know, most people would imagine that I would be damaged from the experience. It gives you a huge amount of confidence. Firstly, when all choice is taken away, you want to indulge your choice when you're released. Secondly, I learned level of fear, and I got to a stage, particularly after one particular incident where I thought I was going to get gang raped, where I couldn't control my body shaking. But in that moment, I suddenly learned a level of fear. And I thought it's not pain. It's not the pain per se. It's the psychological fear and how you engage with that. Where I thought, you've got to be really bloody creative now to push my level of fear up, whatever that may be. And you can make your own imagination of whatever makes you frightened. And so it was really the making of me. And then, I mean, I am a moral obscenity because post-war, then that is reinforced by experience. What I mean, at 29, most of us sort of graduate to scale over our careers as you deal with bigger characters and bigger organizations and bigger challenges, I suppose. Literally, the effect of the fame because of that damn photograph, you're catapulted to levels where you're dealing with government ministers, high-ranking people on a global scale, and so it makes you grow up very fast. So it gives you a confidence.
And how do you keep your feet on the floor? I remember when I was working for the same man, Field Marshal Inge, we got to meet Margaret Thatcher and the royal family and things like that. And he was very quick to keep my feet firmly on the floor. And he said, you know, have you done this? Have you done that? And, you know, just stop me getting carried away with all this, the people you're mixing with. How have you kept your humility and humanity and a sense of self-deprecating humor when it can be quite easy to get carried away and think you are something special because you've mixed with all these famous people?
You can't overplay in the fact I was a fighter pilot, so there's a vanity and arrogance in having to be a fighter pilot, for God's sake.
Really? I'd never noticed that.
Never. Yes, I know. It's all about me, darling. It's all about me. No, first of all, actually, joking apart, the whole flying game is about self-discipline, and it exposes you to risk and also frailties. It's all about capacity and your capacity to deal with stuff and the brutality when it goes wrong. So already by that stage, I appreciate, if you're in the army, you deal with the sort of vitriol of war. But in my career, you deal with the visceral, effect of war. In my career, within 18 months of leaving flying training, I'd been to 12 funerals, because back in the day, you're very exposed to that level of risk. These machines go at a pace and inexperience and things like that, that keeps a level of humility, because it exposes you to your own limitations. So you've got that environment. And secondly, as you say, you need, look, fame is a real drug. I mean, God, I couldn't go to a pub. I couldn't have a standing ovation in a pub. Ridiculous for a couple of years. Everyone treating you with the utmost admiration. And you can, I think, on one occasion, probably, you do kind of believe it. And you need your mates to say you're being a knob. But you've had a whole weekend. When I'm talking, thousands of people are hugging you, kissing you. You're on television. You're staying in a 5-star hotel. I've never stayed in a 5-star hotel, for God's sake. And you can believe it. And so from that moment on, I always thought there's a big red switch. The moment you hit the train, plane, automobile, the switch comes off. So do enjoy it for what it is, because the superficiality of fame is compelling. But the moment you hit the train, plane, automobile, don't believe a damn word of it.
It is.
The switch comes off.
Yeah, it's a good way of looking at it. And of the other aspect, which is so interesting, when I've talked with other fighter pilots, and my father was a fighter pilot, but he was, like you were describing with the funerals, killed when I was 2.5. So I just only have met people who knew my father, who I've wanted to talk to, but also so many of the Fleet Air Arm, because they're trying to land on an airfield the size of a tennis court in a pitching deck in the middle of a stormy sea. Many of them died of all his Dartmouth intake. Very few were alive. And when my mother recounted, she's now long dead, but she'd be looking out over the married quarters and see a plume of smoke come up near the airfield, and somebody else had piled in. And then they would wait for who was the duty officer to come and knock on your door or someone else's door, but you'd see down the street who it was. And then suddenly at school, those kids would be looking shell-shocked because their dad was dead. So to go through that is very tough. And I'm always fascinated. I was reading recently about this, the killing at a distance of a fighter jet pilot, and that you release the rockets. It's very high pressure. You're in that environment. It's tough. You've got to be on the go. It's horrendous, but you're not seeing the eyes of the person you're putting a bullet in. Or when I talked to General John Kisley, he was bayoneting people at the top of Mount Tumbledown, and it was a struggle with a knife, the two of them, and the other guy's guts was in his hands. But suddenly you were taken from being in the cockpit and away from it and coming back to a base. May not have been a particularly nice hotel, certainly not 5-star, but you were face to face with people who were doing really horrendous things to you, and it was very bloody and it was very close. So that must have been quite a shock, that from a distance to being very, very close. I don't know whether you've reflected on that, those who have warfare close to, and those like artillerymen who are firing rounds to people they'll never see.
There's a couple of points. First of all, in terms of distance, my war wasn't about distance, because I only did half a mission, and then I was at the other end. So I did experience the brutality of the physicality, etc. And I have been blown up 6 times, so I know how bombs work.
You've been blown up 6 times. That's a bit
blown up 6 times. Yeah.
Tell me more. What hell happened?
We were in Bath prison headquarters. It was blown up. So, when they say you don't hear the bomb that kills you or the bullet that kills you, sure as hell, you can hear it coming, the scream, and it comes in, the bomb hits. If you imagine you're in a cell, it's about 8 feet by 6 feet, it's pitch black, because it was, and it's a concrete box, and you hear the bomb come in, and the whole building collapsed in the lower floor.
Yeah.
So the floor drops away. You're picked up like a pepper in a pepper pot, thrown around, and then slammed on the floor. And I know, being in the business, there's another 4 bombs at least to come in. They all came in, and you just curl up in a fetal position, waiting for your arms and legs to get ripped out their sockets. And then the bombing stops. You're covered in dust. I couldn't get at you. It's funny, when it's pitch black, you close your eyes. Really weird. And you're going around trying to see if there's a way out of the cell. I couldn't get out of the cell, but you can smell petrol and burning, and you don't want to die in a concrete box. And everyone's screaming and shouting. So I have experience.
And that happened 6 times.
Yeah. So, it's relatively fractious. But going back to this disposition of the fame, the military gives you these skills because there is an institutionalization and an immersive training that that everybody in the military experiences. So that basically every military training is crisis management. How do you deal with complex, extreme environments and make sensible decisions? That's, we need the 20-year-old body or the 22-year-old body, but we need to put a 40-year-old mind on it. It's no different to international sports now. You can tell the stunning people who, lead in tennis or this, that, the other. You go, and they're just measured in the way they deal with the stress. Why? And that's the 40, 45-year-old, 50-year-old coach who can no longer physically do what they're doing, but they impose that, and that really is indicative of the power of coaching. You can accelerate that learning. But no, despite the shallowness of fame, underneath that, what also keeps you in check is I returned, and because of that photograph, I view it like a graphic equalizer. The way people treated me, you have to dial down the militariness, because I returned to 25,000 letters from people, and they were coming in at 1,500 a week, and the majority were from abused people, domestic abuse or sexual abuse. Within months, I was being asked to speak at a rape crisis center, so I'm speaking to 50 women who've been raped. And in the military, I almost lost my rank. So you have to dial up your empathy part of your character and dial down the focused, aggressive, measured aggression of a fighter pilot, detachment, and go more into the other side. Because suddenly I had air marshals crying on my shoulder. I had a 50-year-old, station warrant officers, which is senior rank, NCO rank in the military. Very powerful characters who telling me about their divorce and crying, and how, despite the rigidity of the rank structure, everyone talking to me as if they all knew me. So you're exposed to this extremity of, and this is the beauty actually of the phone. Everyone concentrates on the television and the gloss, but underneath, how I was treated because of that photograph was overwhelmingly magnificent. And if you hear what people discuss with me, people dealt with far more extremities than I have, and that is the life balance that I gained, which I knew that I couldn't end up staying in the military because of it.
I was going to ask you about that. I'll come back to that in a minute, about leaving the military and starting your business in 2000. But it is interesting how you become almost not a lightning rod, because that's power, but people feel like they know you because they've read about you. They've seen the pictures of you with your face all battered up, knowing you've been tortured, being filmed there. And they think that they know you, therefore they can relate to you and they can open up to you about they want to share their experience. And this is where we have to be careful when someone, and as you say, teasing you. RAF pilots are not known for their empathy. It's more about their narcissism and their ego that we always take the piss out of the
Well, no,
pilot.
I know you're taking the piss, but actually, no. There's the one thing is there is an exposure in the air that you've got to rely on your competence and the physics of it. And two aeroplanes get airborne, one comes down, and the other person can have a better aircraft than you, better missiles. But how do you use your skill to defeat that character? And there's no trees to hide behind. You're hiding, and why is it? It's not detachment. It's the technical. All military is technical, but actually, it's the ability to do that in an environment completely based on physics.
Mm-hmm.
And the capacity and the learning capacity to do that is why it costs so much to train one human being just to be a fighter pilot. And you see so many people fail. So you need a measure of confidence to be able to do that at youth, when you're youth. And you need a measure of ability to learn at a rate, I would argue, that is, equivalent to learning to be a surgeon, learning to be a doctor. It is that level of expected competence and doing it at speed.
Yeah, and it's such a tough selection to get in from other pilots I've interviewed and read their books to get in. There's so many hurdles that you can fall at in your selection, and then it never stops. You're continually being compared to peers. And I'm just sort of interested with your view, and you read widely on this, and you've got lots of friends who are still in the Royal Air Force. Here we're seeing in Ukraine this surge of drones, whether it be air, whether it be naval, underwater drones, things like this. And in the aircraft, the most expensive and the most vulnerable bit of the aircraft is the pilot, because they can catch cold, or their wife can be ill, or they can be distracted with, what's happening about their divorce or whatever might be going on. And they need all the training that, the millions of pounds to train one. What do you see in the next 10 years will be the ratio of piloted aircraft to drone-based aircraft flown, as it were, by somebody sitting in a nice container some miles away in America or the UK?
That's a huge question. I tell you why, because you'll know with military procurement that things don't happen as fast as that. 10 years is a time scale. Is you say, when's Tempest going to come in, which is the or the British or European version of a new flying system, and they say it may be manned and it may not be manned. Or the new F-47, which the States is saying that, the next generation fighter. Well, these things take decades to come in, and everyone's trying to learn from Ukraine, but our enemies are trying to learn from Ukraine, and it's the scale of manufacturing, the scale of innovation. And let's face it, I think anybody would say procurement is not the best thing that MOD does. No. The failures and asking an organization like that to move at pace, actually, it only occurs in war. I think the frustration of anybody in the military is, we can't buy that best equipment. Why? Because it's not built in Britain. It's not, you've got the political industrial base, you've got the political base, you've got the industrial base, and therefore that's why it takes decades, because it's not just about the military. The military is about deterrence. And if you've got a good military, you won't need to go to war. The challenge is when we suddenly go to war, you suddenly realize that some of the kit is not as good as it should have been because of those inputs. So forgive me if I'm going to sidestep that question, but yes, would we like a far more adaptive military organization? Yes. But the way the military, you're expecting people to create, my criticism of the military leadership system is you're expecting someone like you and I to go in at 18 or 21, which is in every induction system, you get immersed and you get, sheep dipped into the whole ethos, which means it's not intelligence, it's you get immersed in that system. Then you go through, I'll use the old words because for people who don't know, that you've got a basic staff course, you've got the military training, you've got advanced staff course, then maybe Royal College, and they say it's broadening, but you're then asking someone who gets to the highest level at 50, having been immersed in that system, to come out with a radical new idea or something really progressive. And the military will argue, oh no, but we go to the French or the no, but you don't get someone who thinks differently. Mm-hmm. Other careers in every other, if I've worked in PwC, I then maybe go to M&S, and then someone else joins when I'm halfway up from, I don't know, B&Q, who led at scale. But the military system is this funnel, and all our systems are, we're expecting someone, and I do recognize the talents to play that system, even at the political levels in Ministry of Defence. But you're just not getting the character who will come up with some sense of radical, because basically, if Colonel X won't do it, well, we'll end of career, we'll just get Colonel Y. Why? Because we don't want the system to change.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. And you alluded to it yourself, that what I'm understanding from friends of mine who are working with the Ukrainians is they're using everybody to design these drones in different machines. And they're driven by necessity. They have to live, to survive. Yeah. Everybody's getting into it. Whereas when we're in peacetime, a bit like we dropped our defense spending from when you and I first joined the RAF, in your case, the Army, in mine, we were spending 7% of GDP on defense. Now we're going 2.3, and we're going, wow, we're going to spend 2.5. Well, in this arms race that's going on at the moment, that's not going to do anything. It's going to perhaps pay a little bit of the submarine overspend, which is about 10 billion. So, I think we have some interesting problems ahead. Just going back to lessons that you learned about human nature, I'm really interested in what you learned about yourself or human nature during your time in captivity. What are the kind of things that you learned that because you're on stages, you're talking to people even now in the later stage, some years on from this. What are you telling the business leaders, or what are they interested in? Because yes, they all love a good story from someone who's served in a war or a battle or been captured or a prisoner of war. But how do you relate that to people in business?
I talk about, it's how you deal with uncertainty, and it's not what you do. It's who are you when you're uncertain. Do you step up and actually lead when you don't know the answer, or do you sort of step back? And it's, we all want change management, but it's who are you when change is forced upon you? Who are you? Who are you in a crisis? And as much as I've worked with senior leaders over the years, you can see that conditioning, and there is a conditioning in all, certainly large corporates, which is why everyone talks about, we all like entrepreneurs, because they're pivot. But large corporates, when you've spent your career going through those corporates, trying to react adaptively is really hard, and dealing with that level of uncertainty. And I just don't see very much radical change happening in our large organizations. Now there's the structures of the city markets and everything that does restrict. I mean, God, a number of guys said most of the guys, well, not a number, it's more than a handful, used to say I had far more, one, this is not the job I ever thought it was when they became chief exec. It's not enjoyable. 2, 3, they had far more control over, in terms of leading change when they were operational leaders. And certainly the FTSE guys, lots of them say, God, I can't actually make a bloody decision at all, because everything I have to do has to satisfy the markets. So it's really hard to change these systems that have emerged over the decades. And that's what aligns with what I was saying about, military procurement, these old systems that, yes, have battled their way from that, started up in 100 years ago in a garage like it all is. We admire those older characters who started up, and But now when they pass, £1 billion or what have you, and they get to scale, these are really behemoths of traditionality that is really hard to steer.
Stay with that, because I think that's a really interesting one. In my experience, particularly when working with tech founders who then become unicorns, and a couple of them gone on to be NASDAQ listed or very, very wealthy in their own right, they find it a problem adapting from founder syndrome.
Yeah. No, it is. It's I remember being at a conference with Stelios, who started, EasyJet, and he said, "Look, I can lead." He said, "What did he say?" He said, "It does help when your father's a billionaire, start big businesses." But he said, I'm not the person to take it forward. He said, "I can build a business up to £1 billion, and I love that, and it's interactive and it's compelling." But he said, "Don't ask me to lead it past £1 billion." And effectively, we can all dismiss them. They are really talented, and you need really real big brains. But to take a business from £1 billion to 3-4 billion, at each of those stages, it's those city people, the classic, your Goldman Sachs is who play the markets and how you do that. And that's a very different thing to what we're talking about. And very rarely we always talk to the leaders who took the business to that scale. We rarely talk to the hidden, silent leaders who are really smart and they earn huge amounts of money. Why? Because it's a rare thing to be able to manage at that level and actually change the system. But then you get into, do they want to change the system? And I think increasingly with technology now that and the access that we all have through social media, there's a dissatisfaction with our leaders because you're suddenly actually visibly seeing that they're not changing the system because it's so transparent.
Yeah, and you must have, you've written 2 books, Tornado Down and Team Tornado, albeit that was a while ago. But as you teach people and you speak and you're picking up some themes, what are if there were sort of 3 or 4 themes that you're picking up? You've mentioned some of them with some of the CEOs and the difficulty of being able to change the system and the lack of actual control they have. But what for you marks out the inspiring leaders that we're talking about from the ones who suck the life out of you, what I call the expiring leaders, the misleaders, the ones who seem to be leaders, but actually they're in it just for themselves?
Well, I'm going to use a war story here. There's 2. One is the fundamental of every single leader in the world, and that's trust. I was after this bombing where we got blown up particularly. Long story short, they took out all the prisoners of war, beat the shit out of them. It was just absolute chaos. But they left 5 of us in the prison because they couldn't get us out. There was another bombing raid coming in. And there was another British prisoner of war there, a guy called Budgie Burgess, who was screaming and shouting. He was really fearful. I don't know why I wanted him to live. He basically left school, become a pilot, and now he's going to die. And I felt so much more blessed because I'd been to university, I was married, I had 2 kids. I was only, 3-4 years older than him. So, and I couldn't see him. I couldn't touch him. I was in a concrete box, and I spent the night literally for the next 4 or 5 hours on my hands and knees right at this gap at the bottom of the door, talking and listening, trying to make him believe we could get through. It just lost all sense of belief that he was going to live. And there was another prisoner of war there, an American Marine Corps colonel, so higher rank, older than me. And after the war, we met up in Brussels, and he said, "John, you led us through the war." And I said, "What do you mean I led you through the war?" I mean, a concrete box with a metal door, being systematically beaten and starved to death. I could do nothing. And he said, "No, it's not what you did or did not do." He said, "The way you spoke, we wouldn't have got through without you. We trusted and believed in you, and I wouldn't have got through." And I'm really proud of that because when I joined the military, I spent too much of my time being impressed by other people. There are stunning people who are just good at everything. And I just thought wasn't quite as good as everyone else. Whereas in that moment, and this is part of the confidence, you suddenly, wow, an American Marine Corps colonel, and here I am, And he said, I led them through. And then the second story was after the war, being debriefed all the time in OMD, went to the pub, a couple of Scotties there, they were swearing and this, but they were probably about 19, 20. And respectfully, they weren't the most educated of young men. And they said, oh, we're in the, and they, long story short, they said they didn't understand the politics. They didn't want to be there. They were in the desert. They had the headaches, the shits the whole time. They saw the aircraft fly going north and they were petrified. They went, we don't understand the politics. We don't care about the politics. We don't care about Kuwait. They just wanted to be home with their girlfriends, drinking and partying. And they'd been there for 4 or 5 months. And these young men you may not want them to dinner parties, but these are the people who save our country, basically. And they said, why should we go? There's 25 of us. We've got guns. We're just going the other way. They were seriously scared about, we don't want to die here in this shithole in the middle of the desert. What the hell are we doing here? And they said then about 5 days later, the newspapers arrived and that picture that you described was on the front page of every newspaper. And they said, from that moment on, we knew, I get emotional, sorry. From that moment on, we knew exactly why we went to war. We went to war to save your life. And it gave us a reason for dying. And they cut my picture out, put it on the back of their armoured personal carrier door. And 25 young men, who I did not know, touched that picture, knowing that if they died that day, I was the reason for their dying.
Wow.
And so how I translate that to senior leadership is, what sort of role model are you? We can all lead a team of 50 or 100 because most people who are selected through any organization or end up in leadership positions are there because their intelligence and their personality, whether they're amusing or whether they have vision, or you can engage directly with people. But when you start going, how do you lead the NHS when there's 1 million people? And it's about your philosophy. It's about what you stand for, and you have to live that. So what sort of role model are you? And how do you engage at scale? And with the inertia of any large organization, that people actually, and the 2 words, trust and believe in you, and they don't want your bloody job. That's why you're in the job. But they sure as hell, people are magnificent how they trust as senior leadership. And there are just too many examples of the arrogance and the frailty of senior leadership who don't live up to that trust and are not a role model. And people are very aware. We don't mind that they're paid millions of quid, but because we don't want their job, because they live, eat and sleep the business or the organization, but sure as hell live up to that gift. Because leadership is, we give up our power of our own decision making and give it to you, knowing that it's not, you're not going to make decisions that are not just about self-interest. And increasingly now we're seeing too much self-interest.
It's very interesting. I'm reading one about Facebook. I think I was talking to you before we started, Sarah Wynne Williams, and it's definitely a book worth reading. But you get to see another side to the Sheryl Sandberg and Mark Zuckerberg that they wouldn't want you to see. And I think my experience has been knowing my own faults and blemishes and how actually to begin with, I was a pretty poor leader. I got better at it, but I've still got huge amounts of learning, even in my 60s now, as I'm sure you have, where things, looking back, we could have done it differently. But it's quite interesting, the Royal Air Force. Pilots are put in positions of huge responsibilities with millions of pounds worth of kit. But you're not having to lead at scale until later on. And I just sort of wondered how does the RAF do that, where you do produce some some good leaders, more senior, who are leading large numbers of people. But to begin with, it's really looking after yourself and this huge piece of equipment you have with major risk taking and big responsibilities. And I just sort of wondered, added to that one, if you could add to it, why you decided to leave 9 years later. Why didn't you stay in for a full career in the Royal Air Force?
I'll try and unpack that. First of all, the RAF was, I think, extremely blessed in the Second World War. Without sounding too cynical, the most intelligent people don't normally join the military if you take a career at a national level. They go into banks and and etc. at the highest levels. But in the Second World War, when there was a general war, and I hope this doesn't sound childish, the real intelligentsia of the country went, don't want to join the army because that's really bloody dangerous, get shot at. Navy, God, I don't want to die at sea. I'll join this Air Force thing. It seems, I can still fight in the military. And I think we were blessed with a whole bunch of really intelligent people joining the RAF. And then we were quite a progressive organisation. I'm not entirely sure that that progressive organisation effectively, I think all we've done is downsize since the Second World War and introduce a new weapon system, as into progressive thinking. I'm not sure, but you could say there's a great book called The Psychology of Military Incompetence.
Mm-hmm.
You can apply that to all military forces, to be honest.
Yeah.
And that's where Ukraine and modern, McChrystal's book in America, McChrystal's book of Team of Teams questioned how the military was done at an industrialized scale when they needed to operate within 20 minutes in Afghanistan, etc. So it's the challenge of all established military systems to be adaptive. In terms of why did I not stay in? Well, because, yes, there are a whole load of talented people. I got promoted late, and you can pretty much predict your career path in the military. And I was looking at the future and go, why would I stay in? I had to work hard at flying, but I can do the moving parts, and this is why I started my business. I can seem to see organizational, and I actually went into the military. Within 3 months, I cancelled my role. That role had been in position for 25 years. I reorganized it and went to my senior leader and said, there's not a job here. I've sorted it, basically. So that was one of the things I felt I could offer. But that I'm a why not person, not a why person. Why not try something different? Because all the why, we can write it extremely well in papers and we can present extremely, but why not try something different?
Yeah. And you did allude to Professor Norman Dixon. Those listening, one of his many books is called On the Psychology of Military Incompetence. And it does highlight particularly incompetent British, mainly generals, particularly whether it be from the Boer War or the Second World War, who just did atrocious things and lost the lives of thousands of people through their stupidity and pig-headedness and refusal to ask why not or why or what should I do. So it's a really good book to talk about. But yeah,
you've got to be
decision
careful as well on that, because the professionalism and how the military has evolved. We've got to be careful. I do agree there are traits in some areas, but at the same time, much of why I left is again from the Gulf. I found myself. I was thinking this in captivity. Because you got all this time in the world. And I mean, what's the difference between John Peters, who joined the RAF in 1950s, to me, who joined in 1980 through university and then through the system? I said, and I recognise it's a stellar career, really interesting. The officer training, flying training, staff colleges, all the way through, whether you become an air attaché or a commander. It's a global organisation. It's really, and you go, and at the end you get spat out of 55 and whatever rank, and they were being nice to me about what rank I was going to get to. And you go, I totally get the compelling nature of that. There's a security in that as well, but I get that. But in Captivity, I went, but where's the self-determination? Just waiting for someone to pat you on the head and get promoted. And this is my arrogance, I suppose, because I was looking at some jobs and you go, I've got to wait 10 years before you give me that job. And whilst you're saying I've got to do X, Y, well, I think I could do that now. Now, that may be a balance because I had been exposed outside to this broadening building experience because of the POW experience. But you end up going, where's the self-determination? I don't want to go along this tube. I want to take a left turn and just go play. I wanted this choice. It goes back to this idea of choice. When all choice is taken away from you, which it was, even your life is their choice. You want to have your own choice. And so that's why I didn't pursue. I had McKinsey's were after me. I had airline jobs that were offered to me. And I thought, can I start a business? Can I actually survive off my own wit, which is actually a bloody stupid thing to do at 38 when you've got 2 kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I'll give myself a year. And if I can do it, well, I said, if it doesn't work, I'll go be an airline pilot because I had a trained skill that's well paid.
And just playing on your comment earlier about, some people might accuse you of arrogance. How do you encourage the leaders you work with in business to sail or fly that fine line between self-confidence without it becoming overweening self-confidence and the likes of, your Trump who believes in himself and he would never say these 3 words, I was wrong, I don't know, I need some help. He's always right. And he knows more about, COVID-19 than anybody else. Even when it was clear he didn't. So how do you advise business leaders to manage that self-confidence before it becomes arrogance?
Do you know, over the years, I haven't particularly had to do that because most people, it does become quite self-selecting. And I've been impressed with most leaders that I've met. There's only been a few. And when, I've had a couple of situations where, yes, I've been called in, I've got a real problem with my board. And this was a multi-billion-pound company. I've got real problems with this. I need you to sort them out. I went and interviewed with the board and they said, well, it's him. And that's a classic consultant. It's my job to go back and go, the answer is it's you.
Did you just say it like that?
Yeah. I said, the problem is you. That's what you're paid for as a consultant. You can piss around all you want with being nice to you and you can, but there's a certain time when someone is asking you, what is the problem? And so when the consultant only tells you what they already know, this man went, I know, thank you. He said, I know, because people don't tell you at the same. He said, and he said, so he knew exactly what he needed to do with it. And he was superb. I mean, really, he was superb. He said, I'm doing that. I said, okay, so what are you going to do? And how do I say this nicely? Because this is, when people say coaching, you get down to, what do you think? Well, a senior leader, well, what do you think? Well, what do you can play that tennis ball. They want another adult to say, and I went, you basically need to kind of get your board in, open your legs and let them kick you in the nuts with your apology. And he did this. And when they say business is not personal, this was amazing. He basically did that. He knew what he had to do. He had to apologize. And the reason was, interesting enough, the chief exec before him, because he was a new chief, he'd taken his board from 17 down to 9. So everyone's a bit under tenterhooks. But the previous chief exec, who had been playing really bad Machiavellian politics behind him to destroy his position before he even began. So he'd made a couple of decisions, which he didn't include the board, and that these were powerful people on the board. He said, well, if we got a chief exec who does that, I'm out of this board because we can't have a chief exec who makes independent decisions. And they were large decisions he made. And he basically did an apology. And in that moment, that apology and that humility, and he didn't miss out a single thing. And he said, you are the team I've support you down because you are the team I want to move forward with. Absolutely. And it became a very powerful board for the next 4 years through humility.
It's
And he
lovely.
was a very confident man as well, though.
Yeah, it's lovely the story you tell. And that fits with a very recent experience that I just had with a CEO who, again, the chairman and the board wanted him to have a coach. He'd never had a coach, but very, very successful, hugely successful. But there was a stage in their business at the moment where things were stalling a little bit. So he rather reluctantly agreed to meet different coaches. I was lucky enough to be the one that he chose, but I knew I was on borrowed time, just 6 months. But he did agree to do 360. And yeah, the coaching was fine, but the 360 was revealing. Very successful, a lot of things going well, but there were a few fundamental behaviors that he needed to change. And when I gave him the feedback from them, the 360 feedback from them, he goes, yep, I recognize all that. I said, so what are you going to do with this? He said, I'll share it with the chair and my HR director. And I said, how about this? This is what other CEOs have done in some cases, the really courageous ones. They've shared it with their whole organization, the whole of your report. Share it, strengths and weaknesses, what people unattributably have said about you. He goes, yeah, I am going to do that. And he did that. And people went, wow, that was brave. In other words, stupid. But they admired him for it. And actually, he said, look, guys, I'm sorry. I could do better in these areas. And he immediately started to act on the things that they had all said, which he knew about, but he'd just been avoiding doing them. Particularly, I think the top one you may have come across, CEOs go, I need to get rid of these certain people who are auction thieves or not doing a good enough job, but I haven't because they're people I know well. And when they actually do it, people go, well, what have you waited for? Why have you waited so long? You should have done that ages ago. I don't know what your thoughts are, what you've experienced like that.
Well, we've got to be very careful here, because this idea that we eulogize leaders, Nelson Mandela, here I'll drop a line. I shared a stage with him in South Africa speaking. So, and he actually called himself, I was a terrorist. He said, I did everything wrong. And he said, I wouldn't recommend the methodology, but actually 27 years in captivity, I learned a lot. He said, I wouldn't recommend the methodology. Gandhi slept with young females to test himself, wasn't it? It was to test himself. He didn't touch them, yes, but you've got Martin Luther King was, quite a Lothario with, there. Winston Churchill, was arguably probably a, manic depressive in many respects, or
alcoholic man depressive.
Alcoholic and all that. So we've got a real danger here of they are human beings. So do you have a confidence to lead at scale where everyone could do it better? Because we all opine about, but you go at scale, larger organizations, you go, everyone can do it better. Why shouldn't you do it? But then you've got the balance. Let's bring it right down to more normal stuff where you go, everyone's critiquing you. One of this is leading performance. So you've got a director, let's say a board of directors. I had a chief exec, who one of his directors was seriously underperforming and really pissing off everyone around the board. I mean, just not there, not good at all. And everyone criticizing, and if you keep the underperformer in the business, everyone just depresses their performance, because why would I do anything when you're not actually upholding what your job is to do, is to make those tough decisions. And the point is, and he carried this for about 6 months, and he knew everyone was criticizing, but he said, this guy, no one knows his wife's dying. And as much as I could do this is not something I'm prepared to do. Well, there's a hidden part to leadership where you go, that's real leadership and courage, where you are prepared to accept the slings, the arrows, the bad stuff, because there's a humanity in that.
Mm.
And we've got to be very careful. And so it is a fine line. It's like, just like, right. Let me balance the arrogance with humility. Arrogance is very bad because arrogance is just confidence overdone. So here are in air combat, old air combat. When I say old, because you don't really meet nowadays because of the missiles. But in old air combat, everyone imagines the turning, burning. You have to operate the aircraft right at the 100% of its performance, and you basically you get this tiny little shudder on the stick in the aircraft we flew, which is probably out of date now, but you're right on the edge. And when I say right on the edge, if you took a traditional 1v1, because it's the most simple scenario, if you don't fly that aircraft to 100%, let's say you fly in at 98% performance, the other person will outturn you and you will be killed because they will fire on the engines and you'll be dead. But if I'm talking, so you have to fly at 100% of your performance. But if you go, and I'm talking that much, the aircraft, you basically lose all lift and the aircraft drops out the sky, it stalls. So maximum performance is right on the edge of failure.
Mm.
And so you've got the humanity of how you lead at scale requires a level of confidence to move and to deal with the uncertain and the changing world. Of course, it requires a level of real confidence, and overdone that can be arrogance. But there is a balance in that, in the fact that the humility is you realize that you have to realize you don't know everything. And it's almost like I view leadership as like the spinning. My brother was extremely successful, really young, and he was better at everyone in his job. But then he said suddenly at about 25 became European marketing manager. And he said, suddenly, I just didn't have the capacity to do all this. And he said, I was running around Europe, literally. It's like spinning plates in a fair. I'd go to France, spin that guy up. Go to Italy, spin that guy up. You just don't have that capacity as a human being. So I think it is that balance between confidence and I will say confidence. We've got to be very careful with arrogance. That confidence with humility, how we play that, because you need a confidence leader, else you won't get trust because people don't, and you're not a role model. We do offload our fears and vulnerabilities onto a leader, believing, and it is a case, as we said earlier, this idea of belief that somehow they will steer us through uncertainty.
Yeah, and this is, as you and I were discussing before we went on air, this is where currently with lots of strongman leaders, authoritarians, everybody's putting almost a religious belief and a faith that they know best, whether it be that what they're doing with tariffs is going to work out in the end, or whether they've locked up their opposition leader in Turkey and that they can lead for life, or that Putin knows what to do in Russia, or Zelensky, who's not an authoritarian, knows what he's doing in Ukraine. Interesting times. Well, look, John, we're coming to the end of the podcast, and this is where I always ask leaders like you to introduce yourself, tell us what you've done in the past, what you're doing now, and share a top 2-minute tip on practical leadership that people can listen to around the world in 125 countries and go, that's a bit of advice from John. I'm going to try that out myself. So over to you for your introduction.
Oh, this is a nightmare, isn't it? Okay, I'm John Peters. I was a former fighter pilot in the Royal Air Force. Obviously, not a very good one because I got shot down and captured, and I was held as a prisoner of war in Iraq. That at 29, pretty much a juxtaposition in my life, and that catapulted me to global fame. So I then balanced my career within the Air Force with this measure of fame. And then I left the Air Force in 2000, and I started a business consultancy looking at innovation, strategy, leadership, and change from my experiences. And much of it based on things like human factors, which the Air Force was good at. And the aviation sector tends to be in advance of most other sectors, is how do individuals and organizations learn from failure? So I'd done an MBA. I got a distinction in my MBA, which I was quite proud of. So from my experience, I wanted to take a risk and see whether I could run a business consultancy. So I've been doing that now for 25 years. I'm at the tail end of my career. I've worked globally. It used to sell. I'm a professor of a Russian university. Used to sell, doesn't sell anymore. Funny enough. No, but in Singapore, Australia, all around Europe, um, principally senior teams with blue chip companies. I'm a professor of a couple of universities. I'm not an academic, but I've been given an honorary doctorate. Yes, now I'm at the end of my career and I've been unbelievably blessed. In terms of my advice, advice is a dangerous thing, isn't it? It's the only advice that none of us want. For all the books I've read, and it's one thing I am not particularly good at, I am a provocateur rather than probably why I became a consultant. But when I'm saying leading at scale of significant organizations, my best advice is political intelligence. It is a real skill to be able to manage, and I think it demonstrates leads at scale. There's always someone with vision. There's people who are brilliant at execution, but it aligns right. Aristotle's effective rhetoric, when you go logos, pathos, ethos. Yes, you've got to have a logic to your leadership. Yes, you've got to have heart, absolutely. And everyone quotes emotional intelligence. But ethos is this idea of spirit of the time. And I kind of would almost relate that to the politics of that group, that community you lead doesn't quite, how does it fit? How do you, it's set in its ways. How do you lead it to something different? And it's that beautiful thing, actually, and I'm not taking politics as negative. It's being able to guide people where they have not yet seen, and so it is learn to be politic, or else you'll never be able to lead at scale.
Great advice. John Peters, thank you very much for being on the Inspiring Leadership podcast and sharing your wisdom and for your service to your country. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Good to speak with you.